Our Conversations with the Great Minds segment this week is Irshad Manji, who has a brilliant new book out, Don't Label Me. I think you'll find it very interesting. Leave your comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Irshad Manji as our great mind today in our Conversations with the Great Minds series. Her book is Don't Label Me, an incredible conversation for divided times, and it's absolutely brilliant. We made it one of our book report books that we share little clips of during our when our commercial stations are in break. And so, Irshad, welcome to the program.
Tom, it is wonderful to be back with you. It's been a few years, so I'm glad we're catching up.
Indeed, me too. Thank you so much. So, first of all, I saw your tweet just a moment ago that you're going to come on and that you thought that Representative Omar's situation would come up. Let me just toss that to you. I'd be glad to share my thoughts on it, but you're our guest. What does all this mean to you? Maybe you should first start out by recapping very quickly for people who don't know what we're talking about, what happened.
Right. So, Ilhan Omar is a freshman congresswoman from Minnesota. She is a refugee and a Somali American and a Muslim. And we should not label her just for those reasons. She is much more than that, obviously, as any human being is. That said, she is getting a ton of criticism and has been over the last couple of weeks for statements that she has made that many people believe rehash ancient ugly stereotypes about Jews. So, for example, a couple of weeks back, she said that, we should be looking into the corrupting influence of big money in politics. And she cited AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, which is a very pro-Israel lobby here in the United States. And she cited them. But she didn't cite, for example, the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and the money, it gives to politicians in order to have them vote their way, et cetera. She did that in her apology, but that was too late for many people. Another stereotype she's now accused of indulging in, she said on a panel the other day that she wants to challenge the pressure that forces people to, have dual loyalty, to be loyal to a foreign country, as she put it, namely Israel. And these stereotypes of Jews as not loyal citizens of the country they're living in, or Jews who buy influence through their money, these are all ways that Jews throughout history have been slandered. And many fear that that is the thin edge of the wedge, that will, if left unchallenged, will eventually lead to the Holocaust all over again. So that's the controversy. You've asked me what I think. Well, there's lots to think about this. One is that she no doubt has, relitigated these ugly tropes about Jews. And because she does this, what seems like repeatedly, it seems that she knows what she's doing, which is very disheartening. At the same time, she has apologized in the past, and she has, along the way, raised important questions about, what many of us feel are the corrupting influences of money in politics and so forth. So the question is, how do you deal with this? Do you simply condemn her? Or do you acknowledge that she's raising important questions and correct her about the stereotypes that, she has either intentionally or unintentionally, but at this point I do think it's intentionally put out there. Precisely because, Tom, I don't believe that it's best to label people and then react on the basis of those labels. I think that we would all do well to acknowledge the important questions that she's raising generally, and then to explain to her that you can still raise those questions without indulging in these myths about Jews. And if you think that I'm sort of soft pedaling it or I'm treating her with kid gloves or anything like that, just know that I would have agreed with you a few years ago. I would have simply lambasted this woman. But one of the things I've learned over the years is that if all we're doing is berating instead of relating, then we're not actually going to change anybody's mind. Nobody is insulted into taking a different point of view. And so I think by congratulating her on the important questions that she has brought up, you lower the emotional defenses of her and, importantly, her supporters, so that in another round of engagement, they'll be able to hear what you now have to say about the unacceptability of, these stereotypes of Jews.
Yeah. And that's quite an analysis, and it does open a whole lot of really interesting questions. For example, what other country has the equivalent of an AIPAC in the United States that has the equivalent of that kind of political influence? I don't know of any. I mean, there may be one,
right.
But to the best of my knowledge,
it may be that Saudi Arabia, because of its riches, oil riches,
right.
may be sloshing around with money on Capitol Hill. But that's hardly it's a dubious comparison, right? Nobody wants to be compared with Saudi Arabia. They're as corrupt gets. So do we hold Israel or the Israeli lobby to the same standard?
Well, and there's the other issue too, that my take on it originally was that she was criticizing some of Israel's policies and some of their outside influence in the United States, rather than criticizing Jews, and not having grown up in the United States, not being familiar with. I mean, she didn't even grow up in the West, right? Not being familiar with this whole kind of psychic whatever gestalt, in zeitgeist in which we live. That she was saying things that were unintentionally anti-Semitic or could be interpreted that way. That was my take on it. I didn't think that she was being intentionally anti-Semitic. But I may well be wrong.
At that time, I didn't think so either. But what I did say to people who, asked me what I thought was, instead of censoring her, instead of bearing down on her and telling her to just shut up, what we ought to be doing is reveling in the freedom of speech that she has, because the virtue of free speech, Tom, is that people who use it and ultimately abuse it always are compelled by their freedom of speech to push the envelope too far. And at that point, we'll know if she truly is an anti-Semite.
Right.
Well, back then, I don't think it would have been fair to conclude on the basis of one or two, of these statements that she was an anti-Semite. I'm frankly less convinced now. I'm more convinced that she is one, simply because she continues to make statements that, again, revive ancient myths about Jews.
Yeah.
And surely after the first couple of stumbles, she would have gotten a briefing from her highly educated staff about, what these stereotypes are, and to avoid them as she tries to make valid points.
Yeah, it's a good point. So you suggest, we're talking with Irshad Manji, the author of her most recent book, Don't Label Me, an incredible conversation for divided times, and it is an incredible conversation. You note that diversity can be both a polarizing issue and a unifying one. It's interesting, Louise and I were walking into work this morning, into the studio, and there was a penny on the ground, and I haven't seen a penny on the ground since I was a kid, and there was always this, it's good luck to pick up a penny, and so I picked it up, and the back, I'd never seen a penny that looked quite like that on the back, and it's just, I guess I don't get much change these days, but on the back it was just the shield, and it said E pluribus unum, and out of one, out of many, one, and I said, wow, they've emphasized diversity on the back of the new penny apparently. And I thought that was kind of cool, and I was wondering when it happened and whether or not it was a political statement, and what Donald Trump would think about it. Let me toss that to you. We are going to hit a hard break in about a minute and a half here, but and we'll come back on the other side of it and continue our conversation. But let me toss that to you.
Well, first of all, I did not know that a new penny was being minted, and moreover, that it would be, promoting this is really the motto of the early American Republic, out of many, one. And as you can see, given that it was the motto for these United States, that even in the founders' time, they were celebrating a degree of diversity, but not for the sake of indulging in difference. They were acknowledging that, people from different regions, different traditions, different religions, different cultures are coming together to form one nation. And so as Cass Sunstein, put it in this wonderful book, Why Societies Need Dissent, the framers' greatest innovation was that they relied on airing of differences. They relied on disagreement as a way to bring people together so that nobody felt unheard. That is a level of psychological intelligence that really took some special people to enact. And that was what our framers did. And if we were really living up to their legacy, we too, today, would be taking disagreement as an invitation to engagement, not as a reason or, frankly, an excuse to walk away or roll our eyes or hurl more labels at each other.
Except when that disagreement is, patently offensive. I mean, when that disagreement is say a Nazi, a neo-Nazi shouting, "Jews will not replace us," how else do you respond? This is a large question, I guess.
It's a very large question. And I will say, of course, that, sometimes you really do have to walk away, or if that neo-Nazi is brandishing a gun, perhaps run away. Yeah. But in my book, Don't Label Me, I actually tell the story of a white nationalist who reformed himself because he was so touched by the friendship that he was offered.
We were talking about how to respond to people who disagree with you, and I would note that there can be a variety of different kinds of agreements. There can be disagreements that are predicated on hateful perspectives. There could be disagreements that are simply predicated on respectful and legitimate differences. There can be disagreements that are based on one or the other party believing something that isn't objectively true, but they still have the belief of it. Aren't there? And those aren't necessarily categories; they're points on a spectrum, and so there's potentially an infinite number of categories. How do we know how to engage or disengage or
how do we know who's who, right?
Yeah, and what to do when? Right,
brilliant. So my simple sort of answer to that, and I'll dive more deeply into it in a second, is you don't actually know who's who until you risk conversing with them. And after a few rounds, you will know if they're coming from a place of sincerity, of genuine belief in their point of view, if they're just trying to game you. So let me give you an example that we were cut off from before the break. So you asked me, right? Surely you can't, simply convert someone out of being a white supremacist. As it turns out, in the book, and Don't Label Me, I tell the story of a young man who was a nationalist, a white nationalist. He was raised that way by his parents, and he reformed himself because for a number of years he was befriended on campus, on his college campus, by an Orthodox Jew who would invite this young man over for Friday night or Shabbat dinners. And knowing full well what this young man stood for, his Jewish friend nonetheless engaged in conversation with him, as did other people around the table. That's not to say that they allowed him to get away with, crap. Rather, it's the way they corrected him. It's what they said and how they said it that over time built trust. And because of that trust, because they didn't jump down his throat, he realized that he really, needs to be reconsidering his position. And ultimately, he did. And now he is one of the more vocal anti-racist activists in this country. So my point is that you can never write anybody off. That's not to say, Tom, that everybody under the sun deserves your time and your energy. Not at all. But here's a challenge that I'd like our listeners to think about. Between now and 2020, will each of us take the time to develop just one friendship with somebody on the other side of the political aisle? Just one. And when I say friendship, I don't mean meet them for a coffee and a debate. I mean, ask them questions.
Deep listening.
Listen to what they have to say. Deep listening, and listening, therefore, to understand and not to win.
Yeah.
That way, you'll glean a lot more information from them about why they value what they value and how you can reframe your arguments down the road with those values so that they can hear them.